on to our very first session of the day. And is it an exciting one? Fireside chats. Stick with me here. We've invited 4 high-level global leaders to chat for 7 minutes with 4 youth leaders in the climate and energy sphere. So I want to introduce the 4 pairs that will be talking for 7 minutes. The President of the United Nations 75th General Assembly, His Excellency President Volkan Bozkır, who will be chatting with Ms. Ananya Behander, a youth activist from fossil-free Penn. Then, Enel Group CEO and General Manager and SEforALL Administrative Board Chair, Mr. Francesco Starace, with Ms. Chelsea Tucker, L'Oreal UNESCO for Women in Science Awardee. We will then be joined by our third pair. We have Ms. Kitty van der Heijden, Director General of International Cooperation at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with Ms. Chebet Lesan, founder of BrightGreen Renewable Energy and winner of Africa's Business Heroes Award 2020. Finally, we will be joined by Dr. Kevin Kariuki, the Vice President of Power, Energy, Climate and Green Growth at the African Development Bank Group, chatting with Mr. Chiagozie Udeh, Global Focal Point for the SDG7 Youth Constituency of the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth. Again, 4 pairs, 7 minutes for each fireside chat. Let's start then with His Excellency Volkan Bozkır and Ms. Ananya Behander.
I would like to thank you, Your Excellency, for speaking to us today. It's a real honor for me to meet you. So thank you so much. My name is Ananya Behander, and I'm a sustainable project developer, and I'm also a youth activist and organizer. I recently just graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, where I was a coordinator for our fossil-free Penn group, a student activist group that aimed to have the university divest its coal and tar sand assets from its endowment. So in my experience, organizing has been particularly difficult during COVID, and I understand this must be quite pertinent to you as well, Mr. President. It seems like your role and part of your mandate as the President of the UN General Assembly is to facilitate multilateral discussions and bring member states together and chart a course for the future. So I'd love to hear from you, like during your tenure, as well as during these very strange times, how you be mobilizing member states at the GA Hall to empower their youth to raise their ambitions around the SDG7, especially in this decade of action.
Thank you for your question and for the opportunity to engage with you during this important youth summit. SDG7 lies at the heart of both 2030 agenda and the Paris Agreement. Without universal access to modern energy and greater energy sustainability and efficiency, we will not succeed in achieving the SDGs, including those related to poverty, food security, gender equality, jobs, climate change, biodiversity, and digital connectivity. As President of the General Assembly, I will do my part to galvanize urgent action on energy, call for strengthened political will, increased levels of investment, and scaled up multi-stakeholder partnerships in preparation for the high-level dialogue on energy, which will happen in September this year. So this dialogue is a historic opportunity for us to come together and step up efforts to build a sustainable energy future for everyone. Transformational action on energy by all leaders will be critical. And I commend youth advocates for mobilizing commitments and accelerating action in the run-up to the dialogue. I will convene a thematic debate on digital cooperation and connectivity on the 27th of April this year. Today, 789 million people, predominantly in sub-Saharan Africa, live without access to electricity. Hundreds of millions more only have access to very limited or unreliable electricity. These same people are digitally disconnected, and the digital divide exacerbates many pre-existing inequalities. We need to recommit to equal access to technology and to SDG 4 on quality education, to empower women, youth, and vulnerable groups. Reducing the energy and the digital divide simultaneously is necessary both to contain and adapt the COVID-19 pandemic and to build back better. So to empower youth voices in the General Assembly, I intend to give space to an SDG youth activist at the thematic debate on digital cooperation and connectivity. I also welcome the advocacy of the youth energy leaders for the Wongash Climate Pledge, a commitment to involve youth in the implementation of the Paris Agreement and the achievement of its goals. Ms. Bahanda, as President of the General Assembly, I will continue to mobilize member states within my mandate to empower youth. We need intergenerational partnerships and coalitions of action to turn the dream of sustainable energy into a universal reality for all. You have my full support.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a wonderful, wonderful answer. I think it's very true that technology is a really an amazing way that people have been connecting and forming community during a time where it's easy to feel quite alone, and that it's important that everyone has that access, that equity of access to technology that will enable them to be connected and to organize around the important SDGs. And so that makes a lot of sense. And it's wonderful to hear that you're giving space for people to talk about SDG7, and particularly the youth to talk about SDG7 in the upcoming conference. So thank you. Thank you so much for your time. That was a good answer.
I thank you. I thank you.
Next, Enel Group CEO and General Manager and SEforALL Administrative Board Chair, Mr. Francesco Starace, with Ms. Chelsea Tucker, L'Oreal UNESCO for Women in Science Awardee. Here we go.
Hi.
That was easy.
Mr. Starace, it is absolutely, as the CEO of one of the most dominant players in the energy industry, Enel, it is a delight to meet you and an absolute honor to meet you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
My name is Chelsea Tucker. I am a researcher in the clean energy space, specifically working on modular technology that can convert organic waste into drop-in diesel for energy scarce regions of sub-Saharan Africa. So I'm coming to you from Johannesburg, South Africa today. And I have a question for you. As someone who has met many young entrepreneurs and many young scientists and researchers, all with our own ideas of how to create this green energy transition, we look up to you and the big key players for inspiration and I guess for a lot of guidance. So my question for you is, how are you looking to empower young people in the energy sector and increase the ambition towards the SDG7 goal, and specifically within this decade of change?
I think if you look at the 17 SDGs, SDG 7 is perhaps, with SDG 13, one of the easiest ones to understand and to be motivated by. I mean, it's obviously a very important SDG. I mean, I would say it's key. It's a key enabler for many of the others. How can you have an equitable development? How can you have parity? How can you have sustainable growth if you don't have access to reliable forms of clean energy around the world? This is really fundamental. I mean, it's just so obvious. So I don't think there is much to say in the realm of trying to motivate people around that. It's pretty clear. And I find a lot of enthusiasm around, bringing those that still have little or no access to electricity into a world where they can enjoy available energy at limited costs with no impact on environment. I think it's clear. And by the way, because of the work done in other parts of the world, I think today that concentration of people is largely in Africa. I mean, Africa is really the core of the effort of SDG 7. I mean, not to say that elsewhere it's perfect, but by and large, No, so then you say, how many people can be motivated? It's a big number, because you have today a count of 1.8 billion young people. If you define young, it's by chronological age between 10 and say 25, 24. Okay, let's assume that's young. Okay, so that's a lot of people, and they will be 2 billions by 2030. It's an incredible amount of people, and out of those, I would say 90% of these people are in developing countries around the world.
I find it fascinating that you talk so much about Africa. You know, we have 70, I think a very, very large proportion of Africa is very underutilized in terms of electricity. We have regions in Central Africa that have about 15% distribution of electricity. So really empowering that youth, as you say, is, I mean, the youth, in order to get this kind of technology, is absolutely brilliant. What would you say as a just to kind of close off, what would you say are the three main things that Enel is doing with youth across the world in order to enhance energy?
We have a big push on cities. Cities is where the world is changing. It is not changing outside of cities. Why that? Because people go and crowd themselves in cities. In particular, young people. They move into cities a lot. Why that? Because they think that in cities their life will improve. And indeed, it does in a way. So the question is, if you really want to have impact, you have to focus on what happens in cities and around them. I mean, there are cities that become monsters in a few years. So number one, cities. Number two is, this question that is sad to say, it's not only about education, because if you become a very clever technician or a fantastic entrepreneur, but around yourself, around you, there's nothing, you move out. You go elsewhere, which, for example, has happened in the decades that passed of all the efforts done to create a medical class in Africa. Most of the doctors formed in Africa became good doctors and left. So obviously, why not? I mean, so what happens is that we have still a sanitary problem. So you have to make sure that the entrepreneur finds in the city, again, because that's where everything happens, a system around itself that makes his life good enough and interesting enough and lively enough to stay. So that's a second point. It's not only a question of empowering people, but let them understand that it's better that they stay. It's much more interesting and has better future, than becoming an immigrant somewhere else. And thirdly, I think, like I said, it's a question of educating, or say, showing to the rulers of all these countries that what they learned at school is not anymore the right thing. They have to, yeah. This is not only for Africa, it's everywhere. I mean, the governments of the world are behind in what's happening in the energy transition, and that's a big effort everywhere. So it's invariant in many parts of the world. These are the three things. But again, these three things mostly happen in cities.
This is Starace, from all the way from cities to energy to youth. I am learning so much from you in such a short space of time. Thank you so much for spending this evening with me. And I'm sure
my pleasure
has learned so much. Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thanks to you both. Now, moving on, Ms. Kitty van der Heide, Director General of International Cooperation at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Ms. Chebet Lesan, founder of BrightGreen Renewable Energy and the winner of Africa's Business Heroes Award 2020. Take it away.
Thank you so much for joining me here. Today, we're having a discussion about the youth, and it's a pleasure to have you. I'll give you this opportunity to briefly introduce yourself, and then we can jump right into the discussion.
Thank you, Chebet. It is really my pleasure to be with you, and through you with the energy community and with young people worldwide. My name is, as you said, Kitty van der Heijden, and I'm the Vice Minister for Development Cooperation of the Government of the Netherlands. It's an honor to be with you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So to briefly introduce myself, my name is Chebet. I'm the founder of BrightGreen. We're a company based in Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya, and we're working to reduce the cooking cost and increase clean energy for the most vulnerable families across the country and more largely across Africa. And maybe with that, I'll just quickly jump into the question. So, Ms. Kitty, within your role as DG International Corporations and within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I'd really want to understand how do you approach the energy transition and the role of youth? And how is it that the Netherlands can empower youth in 2021 to power their voices towards SDG 7 this year?
That's a really big question, but it's also a really important question, Chebet. Look, if you look at it, I think one of the biggest challenges we have as a global community is the global energy transition. This is absolutely crucial for not just the survival of the planet, the livability of the planet, but for mankind and civilization, and particularly to bring the perspective of a dignified life for poor people and a future for young people, for you guys. And central to addressing that climate change aspect is the energy transition. 2/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions come from fossil fuels, and we need to take them to net zero by 2050. Now, that sounds like a long time. It's your lifetime, but it's actually a really small time for a global transition. And while we do that, it's of course not just a question about, how do we bring down emissions, but it's equally about how do we reduce inequalities as we do that? How do we deal with the fact that we have 800 million people that have no access to electricity? We have 3 billion people, and you know that very well, without clean cooking. 1 billion people that rely on a health system that has no electricity. So, during times like these of COVID-19, how do we get them vaccines? So this is an incredibly important element of the global SDG agenda to weed out energy poverty by 2030. It's something that we care deeply about because I think this is an absolutely essential way to address climate change and to achieve the SDG. So if you will, it's a double whammy. On the positive side, big as the challenges is, I also see the silver lining that this brings massive opportunities for innovation, for new jobs, and for young people. And if you look at innovations, how fast it goes in just the 10 years that I am working on these issues, you've seen, renewable energy really becoming more cost efficient than coal, and in many places even cost competitive with oil and gas. We see electrification of our transport fleet. Innovation goes so fast that, in the next few decades, we will achieve an energy future that is electrified, decentralized, digitalized, where renewable energy is abundant and almost free. And so for me, if I then bring in the perspective of young people, this is where your jobs will be. This is where your future will be. So it's not just that we can do it, it is because we must do it. I think it's an agenda embedded in the SDG, and we should do it because it's the right for young people to have a future, and we need to enable that. And to the future, I would say for young people, 40 million jobs are going to be created in this energy transition, additional jobs. This is where I think the future is. It's where the future should be. And so how we enable that as government of the Netherlands and how I try to really accelerate that change is by having a dedicated lens on young people, young people's perspectives, young people's voice, and young people's needs to profit from this transition in everything we do. So one thing that we have done is we have appointed a youth ambassador for youth. His mandate is really to focus on the nexus between, I would say, education, work, and voices. Their voice. Are you heard when decisions are taken? What I think is an incredibly important part of the youth agenda is giving you not just agency to build your own future, but also a voice. Are you there, as I said, when decisions are taken? So, for example, in my government, in my ministry, we have formed a youth advisory commission not just from Dutch people, because Dutch people, what do we know about your realities? But from people of the global south, of different perspectives, ethnicities, and geographies, to advise us as a government, what is it you need? Do we have the right perspectives? Do we understand your reality? And how can we help you create a better future for yourself? Because I think that is by far the best perspective that we can offer. We can enable that change, and we can help you get on that trajectory. One last point I wanted to make, Chebet, particularly in this time of COVID, which is, which is setting us back, if you will, a decade, if not more, in so many ways. It has also the inbuilt opportunity to kickstart a new future, a future in which sustainability and inequality are addressed as two sides of the same coin. The global world, the global public sector is now investing the equivalent of 17% of the global GDP. 17% of the global GDP in relief and recovery of COVID. That's incredible. I'm an economist by background. We've never, ever, ever before done this as a global public sector. If we use that money well, we can build and we can accelerate, the net carbon-free future that we need. We can accelerate energy transitions, but we can also make sure that we build a future where inequalities between countries, between genders, between geographies are weeded out if we do it smartly. We've never before put so much money in the global economy. Let's use this crisis to make sure we build a perspective that young people need. Let's build the perspective that we have embedded in the SDGs. If there is ever a silver lining to a crisis, it is this one. Let's not waste that crisis.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kitty, for your insight. I particularly resonate with bringing young people to the table, involving them in decision-making, bring them into the contributions that need to be made for next steps. And I'm also passionate about young people and encouraging them to step up when these opportunities arise, when these tables arise. We really need to also step up as youth and as young people and engage and involve ourselves in these conversations.
Do you know what I took away from that incredible fireside chat? I took away that innovation and reinventing something doesn't mean creating new things. Sometimes it means thinking differently. It means including a diverse array of people so that you get the best outcome. Sometimes innovation is as much in ideology and in who we include in the solution as it is in the solution itself. How exciting and interesting are these talks? I've got one more left for you. Dr. Kevin Kariuki is the Vice President for Power, Energy, Climate and Green Growth at the African Development Bank Group, chatting with Mr. Chiagozie Udeh, Global Focal Point for the SDG7 Youth Constituency of the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth.
Good evening, Dr. Kevin. It's good to have you. I am Chiagozie Udeh. I am the global focal point for the SDG7 Youth Constituency, which is the main channel for engagement for young people through the energy multilateral processes across the globe, trying to engage in sustainable energy. And it's really a pleasure and a delight to know that you can make your time to join us today, Dr. Kevin Kanina Kariuki, being the Vice President of Power, Energy, Climate, and Green Growth at the African Development Bank. My absolute pleasure to have you and welcome.
Thank you very much, Chiagozie. Indeed, I am delighted to join the conversation on this important topic, basically to lend a voice from the African Development Bank.
Great. And just picking up from that, it's been quite a tremendous number of years. The past few years has probably been the most active of the bank in 5 key areas that it's working on, the high fives, as the president normally calls it. And energy is specifically one of these, especially coming from a continent where you have about 600 million people without access to electricity. So in your capacity, a very huge capacity at that, how are you ensuring inclusion and equity in your project assessments to ensure that they provide green jobs and skills and opportunities for young people in this continent that is about the youngest in the world?
Thank you very much, Chiagozie. First, inclusivity is an overarching objective of our current 10-year strategy at the African Development Bank. We use this strategy as a tool to bring about prosperity by expanding the economic base across the barriers of age, gender, and geography. Therefore, by necessity, our investments help improve skills and competitiveness. It also ensures that these skills better match the opportunities. This is why the African Development Bank formulated a 10-year Jobs for Youth in Africa strategy, with a target to create 25 million direct and indirect jobs and empower 50 million young people with employable skills, and propose the creation of a youth enterprise investment bank. Our second overarching objective is to ensure that the anticipated inclusive growth is sustainable. We do so by helping African countries graduate transition to green growth. These objectives inform and drive our work in the African Development Bank's Power, Energy, Climate Change, and Green Growth Complex that I head. As a result, today, the African Development Bank deliberately prioritizes renewable power over all other sources of power generation as it leads Africa's net zero carbon transition. But from a youth perspective, it is our work in the decentralized grids that excites me the most, especially as we expect that by 2030, over half of all new connections will be from decentralized power solutions. In other words, solar home systems and mini grids based on renewable energy. We will have this in rural areas where the bulk of Africa's population lives. Just imagine the transformation of these rural areas by these green and decent jobs. The job creating impact of decentralized energy is complemented greatly by two of our very innovative programs. Our programs, our Jobs for Youth in Africa program, and our Youth Entrepreneurship and Innovation Multi-Purpose Trust Fund. Through these programs, we are expanding employment opportunities and strengthening the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Africa.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vice President. Really happy to have your responses on this. I'm sure African youths are very enthusiastic and looking forward to this being unveiled very soon. And that's my questions for you, and I'm happy to answer any if you have one for me.
How are you going to take advantage of the decentralized power solutions in the rural areas to promote the productive use of electricity facilitated by our programs in the rural areas?
Very interesting. I'll tell you. For me, I lived in not kind of a rural area, but a very infrastructurally deficient city in Nigeria before I moved to Geneva, and it was a big problem. You know, my productivity was really reduced because of inconsistent electricity, lack of access, and everything else. So in this sphere, it's a lot of co-benefits coming with decentralized energy solution, like you're mentioning. When it gets in this rural area, it has to be, connected to education, increasing education for young people, connected to their businesses, increasing their business output, especially now within this pandemic. We've tried to work with a lot of some of our youth groups who faced challenges initially during the lockdown in their solar businesses because they were not considered as essential business, and the lockdown affected some of them. They had to lay off staff. So they'll find another entry point to access opportunities in this sphere and be able to serve as distributors of this energy, grow their businesses, have some innovation on what model of business works. Because in our engagement, again, a lot of conversations are on what business model works the most, pay as you go, or solar home systems with a lot of connecting units or thereabout. It's also this, we have to continuously evolve and provide solutions to, and solutions like you've mentioned will make it a lot easier for young people to play in this space, access, distribute, and serve in this long chain of co-benefits for decentralized energy solutions. Thank you so much, Dr. Kevin Kariuki. Thanks for your time, and thanks again to the AFDB for the great work they are doing in this fair. I'm sure the young people of this continent are counting on you and really appreciate the efforts you make.
Thank you very much, Chiagozie.